So another property of air is how it transmits sound. And we're going to have to do a couple of pretty careful definitions for this particular subclass of resources, because foresters, we're not typically thinking about sound as a forest property or attribute, but it absolutely is on a stand-by-stand basis. So let's get into it just a little bit. Soundscapes are extremely fragile. It just takes a single loud noise to shatter the ecological function of sound in an area for all of the sound-dependent creatures in that area. And some of these sounds are pretty loud. When we're talking about marine protected areas run by the National Park Service, a painfully loud sound that's verging on being damaging if you're exposed to it over any long period of time, be like 100 decibels. Tectonic activity in the ocean, like around the Pacific Rim, the Rim of Fire, you can get sounds over 1,000 decibels, like enough to shatter tissue when that sound wave hits you. So every once in a while when you see, like in the news, a whole pod of whales will have washed up dead on some, Andean shoreline on the west coast of South America, or a pod of dolphins in Malaysia or something like that, just forced up onto the beach and like they're bleeding and just their bones are shattered. It can be something like a tectonic event, so sound has consequences, or it could be sonar exercises with submarines, and naval wargaming exercises have had some pretty brutal consequences on cetacean groups in the Pacific as well. We don't really have any management control over that side of stuff, so we'll just talk about sound pollution and stuff like that inside your park. So this is a joke in reference to my colleagues Ken Kaliski and Kurt Fristrup of Resources Systems Group and the United States National Park Service's Acoustic Ecology Research Program out of Fort Collins, Colorado.
Which shall I use for Steve Lawson?
So if you are kind of an audiophile, and if you're an audiophile, you know what an audiophile is. If you're not an audiophile, you probably don't understand spending like $1,000 on a pair of headphones for like that perfect, warm, analog sound. But for those who know, you know. If it sounds interesting to you to go to like every national park, every national forest, every protected area, anywhere in the world really, this is being done all over the world, and set up arrays of microphones, audio traps, instead of camera traps or netting traps or anything like that, rocket netting. This is a very aggressively expanding area of forestry research, ecoacoustics. And governments have been working on this for a little while because, as it turns out, there are real consequences to how we set up our civil societies with respect to noise pollution in particular. It might blow your mind a little bit when we get into the statistics of it. So here's a kind of a snarky thing. Kids typically noisy, and they experience maybe in a different way than some adults do. So this is recognizance of the idea that you and I, when we show up to a place with our douchey Bluetooth speakers and stuff like that, we are not only having a good time, but we are also actively modifying, reshaping the acoustic landscape around us in that time. Now, it's a transitory effect, right? As soon as we leave that area where the Bluetooth speaker dies or our Spotify cellular connection is no good, right, that sound goes away. But while it is there, it is highly disruptive, okay? So, again, because water is also an acoustic transmissive medium, but it's much more dense, sounds have much higher consequence, noise pollution has much higher consequence in marine and freshwater environments, okay? So, this is really only about a 30-year-old area of inquiry and especially management policy for the National Park Service. Australia and New Zealand and the United States basically led the charge, and then the European Union picked up once that was formed shortly afterwards and started leading the charge on acoustics and ecoacoustics research. So in the year 2000, we get this Director's Order number 47. So this is not a law, but this is like one half step back from a law. This is as law for park rangers. To the fullest extent practicable, the protection, maintenance, or restoration of the natural soundscape resource in a condition unimpaired. Use that definition very carefully. Unimpaired by inappropriate or excessive noise sources. Okay? The National Park Service is now tasked permanently with treating sound as a first-class resource right up there with archaeological sites, right up there with the vista resources of the Grand Canyon and Yosemite Valley and all these places. Okay? This is a really big deal. So, research by Krauss, right around the same time, demonstrated that noise levels, and I'll take a second to define noise versus sound here in a sec. Noise levels have encroached, so this problem has been getting worse. If you brought a super sensitive microphone and recorder system to a national park in the year 1900, it would be very quiet. It would not be silent. There's a lot of natural sounds that are okay. Natural sounds are not the same thing as human-caused noises. So let's take a second to define sound versus noise. Sound is the physical property of vibration of fluid particles against one another and transmission and propagation thereof. So, you vibrate your vocal flaps by running air over them. That sound wave propagates spherically out from your voice box and basically dissipates with the fourth power of radius, so the square of the distance between your voice box and the hearer's ear. So sound falls off in intensity rapidly, right? That's just a physical property of air. Is it vibrating at a certain pitch, or is it not? Is somebody speaking, or are they not? It's an objective thing. So a tree that falls in the forest and nobody is around to hear it, it still makes a sound. Noise, on the other hand, is the human's subjective perceptual evaluation of sounds and deciding that some of those sounds are bad, annoying, scary, dangerous, injurious, what have you. So, this is the difference between, like, going to a concert in downtown Carbondale, like a public park, you know, have them throughout the summer and stuff like that. And everybody's jamming and having a good time. If at 4 a.m. the following morning, your next door neighbor, like through the apartment wall, is playing the exact same song, the exact same volume, the exact same way, maybe even a recording of that concert at 4 in the morning, and it wakes you up, that one's noise. Does that make sense? Okay, so noise, bad. Sound, not good or bad. It just is. So, noise harms our solitude and stuff like the ability to think. Studies have shown that if you if you ask elementary school kids, I don't know what weird Nazi thought up this experiment, but it makes sense. Stick with me for a minute. If you have kids in a classroom setting and they have to take a test, and you have a bunch of just like randomly generated background noise, like maybe a synthesized or recorded version of like a noisy HVAC system, and you track their scores, their ability to complete the test correctly, with different students in different classrooms hearing differing levels of the same noise, the differing loudness of the same noise, their test scores drop in proportion to the sound, to the point that at about 90 decibels, which is basically somebody yelling at you from arm's length, is about 90 decibels. cognitive function stops in these kids. Like, believe it or not, when you're shouting at little kids, they can't take a test. So, the same thing is true for you and me. Now, think of any of our outdoor activities, maybe even forest recreation specific activities, that generate some sound. Do any of them generate sound at 90 decibels? Or more? What about stuff like skydiving? Airplane engines are famously loud. Okay? So, sometimes we're making a bunch of noise in pursuit of having fun, but that noise is blocking us and everybody else, not just from having fun potentially, but from literally being able to think. Like take a test or critically evaluate, which way should I go on this trail? Noisy areas cause huge physiological and psychological and cognitive effects. Side effects, negative effects. So the encroachment is subtle, but it's relentless. As development has sort of built up lodges, and there's like an IMAX theater south of the Grand Canyon South Rim Village. Why? In the middle of nowhere in Tucson. Because there's a bunch of tourists nearby with too much money. And sometimes it's rainy and cold at the Grand Canyon, I guess. Like, that IMAX theater has a pretty burly HVAC system because the IMAX projector runs at a very high temperature. So you gotta cool that thing off so it doesn't burn out the electronics. And you make a bunch of noise to do it. Okay? So, Grand Teton National Park is basically a north-south running park, a north-south running mountain range, the Tetons, and then the Snake River headwaters running through that area with a bunch of whitewater rafting and stuff like that. Jackson, or Jackson Hole, technically, is basically the gateway community at the bottom of Grand Teton National Park. So you got Jackson Hole, home of amazing fish taco trucks and microbreweries and storefronts where you can walk in and charter a private jet if you particularly feel like it. Like, it's that kind of a town. Then you got Grand Teton, John D. Rockefeller Memorial Parkway, Yellowstone National Park, Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. All shaped like a big microphone, right? And the flight lane for the tiny little airport in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, for whatever reason, the FAA thought it'd be a great idea to bring all of those planes down so you're like on the landing approach and you're looking sideways and up at the Teton Peaks as you fly down parallel to the flow of the river, which is pretty knuckin' futz when you think about it acoustically speaking, because those mountains are tall and flat-sided on the near sides, so they are blasting all of that sound that's going sideways from the plane over and over and over as one plane, one plane, one plane. It's a lot of small private jets, so a lot of jets per 10,000 people cycling through Jackson Hole. A lot of noise per person. Okay.
When I was driving from Grand Teton towards Jackson Hole,
Uh-huh.
I had come from Yellowstone, so I had passed by the way I was headed south. I saw a plane like landing, and I had no idea that there was an airport over there. Like I was amazed at how close it was
Yeah.
to actually like Grand Teton and like that whole bit of the park. At first, I thought I was seeing a plane crashing. Like it was just kept on getting lower and lower. I'm like, what the hell? And then it put on landing gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 2 minutes later, another one's doing it. And another one. There's a ton of Learjets out of that area. Learjets are the small, like, private executive charter flights. And that's unfortunate. But once something like that gets set up, like, you're not gonna like bulldoze that airport and rotate it 90 degrees to get all that air traffic out of there. Like, once you set these decisions in place, you got the noise, and you can't take that away. It only might grow over time as Teton becomes more of a skiing and fish tacos and like people in, oh god, those like puffy vest jackets and like leggings and just ridiculous. Don't get me started. All right. So it's difficult to stop once it's established. Noise gets into your park, it just leaks into your park beyond the boundary and starts disturbing your wildlife and your visitors and stuff like that. And it's a Herculean effort to try and fix it. So at the Grand Canyon, there was a study that pointed out, hey, if you're wilderness backpacking in the Grand Canyon during the peak visitor season, it's not a wilderness experience at all, because there's a tourism helicopter, like a canyon overflight tour kind of thing. Helicopters are super noisy. Coming in from Las Vegas, not that far away, not that expensive to charter a flight from Las Vegas when you're up at the casino and you got a couple $1,000 to blow, right? Let's go overfly the Grand Canyon and snort lines of coke off of the pilot's arm, something like that. Anyway, so the Park Service figured out that when you're backpacking down in the Grand Canyon, at the worst, you're hearing another helicopter like every 6 seconds. Think about that. A new helicopter every 6 seconds, all day long. And some of these people have been waiting 20, 30 years to get that rafting permit down in the Grand Canyon, and then whoop, 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 and whoop, 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 one after the other, all day long. And so the Park Service did kind of put their foot down and work with the FAA to get specific flight lanes established that were apart from, for the most part, the wilderness backpacking corridors and acoustically shielded from them. So the helicopters had to stay up above like X thousand feet, so they were just too far away to be real loud, or they had to be like down in the canyon and acoustically behind like a bluff wall inside the canyon, so you couldn't hear it as much on the other side if you were backpacking. And you had to file your flight plans and declare you were doing a tourism flight here, so you could like make sure it wasn't going to be every 6 seconds and stuff like that. And that worked. But there were a lot of rich people not real happy about it, because it was like all of a sudden a lot fewer flights available, or more expensive flights, because they're now more regulated. But that was a move to try and stop a rich few people from absolutely wrecking people's week-long backpacking backcountry experiences. Like somebody gets all the benefit and somebody else is paying all the cost or enduring all the side effect. All right, that asymmetric conflict going on. So now the National Park Service uses noise or absence of noise incursion or intrusion to help define what are called recreation opportunity spectrum classes. That is, we have resources like your trails, your campsites and everything. Somewhere, each one of those miles of trails, each one of those campsites is somewhere on a spectrum of like super primitive, backcountry, never gonna see anybody else the whole time, cutting your own trail, boiling your own water, fighting off your own bears, all the way over to, at the far end, full cellular coverage, big paved parking lots, like an ice cream truck, ranger talks at night and stuff like that, like lots of people around, right? So super civilized and developed spectrum contrasting against super primitive and undeveloped, right? And then your stuff could be anywhere in between. So what we do in parks to help kind of manage this stuff is we draw these big areas on the map called ROS zones. And we classify those zones as this whole area, we're gonna keep it quiet. In addition to it being low accessibility, low development, we have some trails there, but we're not gonna like smooth them out at all. And over here, yeah, it's gonna be noisy. We're gonna have like 300 or 400 RVs on concrete slabs running their generators all day long to power their satellite TV and hot tubs and stuff. But that's okay, because we are clustering all the noisemakers away from all of the people who are specifically and actively trying to get away from noise. So, the soundscape and its pollution or lack thereof is a great way to understand the map of your park. So, as you guys are getting together your sort of senses, your reports for what are the different types of resources, how are they showing up at your park, how are they being managed, how could we manage them, take a look at sound. And think about things like acoustic shadowing. So if you have a noisy thing, a mountain range, and then another area, this other area is in the acoustic shadow of the mountain range. So sound, as it's propagating, moves in straight line directions. It's going to bounce up and off of that intervening mountain range. And the folks over here have no idea there's a sound being emitted. The sensitive wildlife species, like elk, have no idea that a sound is being emitted over here. It might even be busy. It might even be stacked with people. Over here, ecologically quiet in the acoustic shadow. Okay? So, take a look at your park. Again, look at its topography. Like you're gonna take a look for things like where could I get a temperature inversion, maybe some air quality issues. Those ridges are gonna sort of bound areas of temperature inversion basins. And on the far side of those temperature inversion basins, we could have some really acoustically shadowed areas. So we did some really cool research at Rocky Mountain National Park a little while ago to sort of draw these acoustic shadows, simulate it in GIS, and run virtual hikers through there to figure out if you go from this trailhead versus this trailhead, how long does it take you, or how many meters do you have to travel, how many minutes do you have to go before you're away from human-caused sounds and the natural quiet, the leaves rustling, the water rushing, the squirrels chittering at each other, the Swainson's warblers making strange alien sounds. How far do you have to go to where those are louder than the human-caused sounds and I can't hear those human-caused sounds anymore because they're masked, or they're behind the acoustic shadow of the ridge that I just climbed and dropped off the backside of to get away from that noise? Okay? So think about something like this, right? In the entire state of Massachusetts, where there are a lot of people with a lot of money, and some mountain ranges, like the Appalachian Trail goes through Massachusetts for one short section. There's no place, no square foot or meter where you can go anywhere in that state and be in a park without hearing ATV noise. And so that's maybe a pretty good gig if you like ATVs. And you're kind of screwed if you're anybody else, right? So that gets into that equity and justice thing. That's not fair to everybody else if one class of user is kind of ruining it for everybody else, to the extent that noise, or the air pollution of ATVs, or the water chemical pollution of ATVs is an issue. Okay? Cool. So let's end on a couple of definitions and we'll pick it up on Wednesday. Soundscape is the watershed for sound. All right? It is a logically grouped and acoustically grouped area around any arbitrary point that you can hear to and hear from. So if you're on a mountain peak, your soundscape is all of the terrain around you, right? If those ridge lines are focusing sound upward into the atmosphere, you're along that escape route for sound down in the valley on all sides. If you're down in the valley, you can't hear anything from on the other side of the mountain unless it's extremely loud, and that's probably going to be a one-off, short-term thing, okay? So, think of every campsite in a national park, your national park, as having its own soundscape, slightly different, maybe even just by a couple of meters on its perimeter, than the next campsite over. And a campsite that's surrounded by a whole bunch of densely leaved trees, dense foliage, and mid-story and ground cover, it's more acoustically shielded. Its soundscape is smaller and more natural, most likely, than a big open campsite, which has a whole bunch of hardscape, a bunch of asphalt, tar and chip, concrete roads nearby that are reflecting sound and transmitting along the ground toward you. Okay? We're going to use in this class A-weighted decibels. So decibels are a measure of sound pressure, volume. It's the amount of energy of the vibration as it pressure waves its way out. That is a decibel, the unit of measure of sound pressure. A-weighted decibels take into account the range that you and I can physically hear, okay? So that's between 2,000 hertz, 2,000 vibrations per second, and 20,000 hertz per second, right? So that's like the lowest bass note you've ever heard, where it's like thumping in your chest at the Fish concert at the Wall of Sound, right? And you can't actually hear those sound waves, but they're so low frequency, you can actually see the sound waves a little bit. And any of you guys have a classmate back in high school who'd play like a really high-pitched whining or droning sound, and your super old teacher couldn't hear it because we tend to lose high-frequency hearing range in humans as we get older? And they do it to like piss off classmates, but the teacher would have no idea that anything was happening? Just me? Okay. Anyway, so that's right at that 20,000 hertz. So think like super high-pitched mosquito sound. That's the range. So for anything above that, even if it's super loud, we don't hear it, so it doesn't count for our understanding of our soundscape. So when I say A-weighted decibels, that is the human perceptible region, and that's what we're going to use to define stuff like, man, that's an annoying noise. If there's an annoying noise but you can't hear it, it's not annoying. Okay? Cool. Let's end it right there for today. See you on Wednesday. I'll post the, or a template. It's pretty open-ended for your parks. Let's come back on Wednesday and get some good work done.